Have you ever wondered what happens when two broken souls find each other in the most impossible circumstances? What I'm about to share with you isn't just a story. It's a testament to how love can bloom in the harshest winters of our lives. Marcus Chen stood at his cabin window, weathered hands gripping the wooden sill as twilight painted the Montana wilderness in shades of purple and gold. 47 winters had carved lines into his face, and this one, 2023's brutal season, felt like it might be his last. His beard, now silver at the edges, framed a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. His shoulders carried the weight of loss like a physical burden, which in truth it was. 4 years ago he'd buried his wife Sarah beneath the ancient oak that bent toward the creek like it, too, had been broken by grief. Since then, Marcus had lived in a silence so complete it had become its own language. Not because he couldn't speak, but because there was no one left worth speaking to. And isn't that the cruelest irony of grief? That it isolates us precisely when we need connection the most. The cabin held Sarah's memory in every corner. Her reading glasses still sat on the kitchen table, folded beside a book she'd never finish. The herb garden she'd tended with such care had long since surrendered to weeds, though Marcus couldn't bring himself to clear it away. He still slept on his side of their bed, though the other half had grown cold years ago. There had been a child once, a son they'd lost at birth. After that, Marcus stopped building cribs and started building walls. He mended fences, repaired equipment, and kept to himself. The nearby town of Cedar Falls whispered about the quiet man who rode in once a month, spoke only when necessary, and paid in exact change. Some said grief had driven him mad. Others said he'd always been that way. If you've ever felt that kind of bone-deep loneliness, you'll understand what comes next. But first, let me ask you, have you subscribed yet? This story gets intense, and you won't want to miss how it unfolds. That December night, as snow began to fall in thick, silent curtains, he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the wildlife he knew so well. Faint, irregular, like something wounded trying to move through the drifts. At first, he thought it might be a deer, injured and struggling through the deep snow. But as he stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand more from habit than genuine threat, he saw her. She lay crumpled beneath the massive pine by his barn, curled inward like the cold had tried to hollow her out. Her jacket was torn at the shoulder, dark stains spreading across the fabric. Blood, he realized. Her feet were bare, red with frostbite, and she couldn't have been more than 22 or 23. Here's what struck me most about this moment. And pay attention, because this is crucial to understanding what happens next. For a long moment, Marcus simply stared. The way a man looks at something that challenges everything he thought he knew about his own capacity for caring. His first instinct wasn't compassion, it was fear. Fear of complication, of responsibility, of letting another person close enough to hurt him again. But then he lowered the rifle. He didn't ask who she was or where she'd come from. Questions could wait. He simply lifted her with careful arms, surprised by how little she weighed, less than his grief, he thought. And carrying the scent of pine smoke and something else, desperation maybe. When he crossed the threshold of his cabin, it felt like inviting a storm inside. He laid her near the fireplace and wrapped her in the only blanket that didn't smell like Sarah's lavender soap. She stirred faintly, lips cracked and dry, murmuring words in a language he didn't recognize but somehow felt in his bones. Spanish, he thought. She had the look of someone who'd been running from more than just the cold. Marcus heated water and gently cleaned the blood from her skin. There was a deep gash on her arm, not fatal, but serious enough to have weakened her significantly. The wound was clean, though, suggesting it was recent. He stitched it with the quiet skill of someone who'd done field medicine during his army days, before the ranch, before Sarah, before everything fell apart. She watched him through half-closed eyes, flinching only once when the needle met flesh. Neither spoke. Words seemed inadequate for whatever understanding was passing between them. When he finished, Marcus stepped outside to wash his hands in the snow and let the mountain air clear his head. The moon was rising, casting long shadows across the valley. He stared at the oak tree for a long time. Sarah's tree. She'd planted wildflowers around its base every spring. They'd stopped blooming after she died. Inside, the girl had moved closer to the fire, asleep now. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Marcus stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, then moved to his chair by the fire and sat. He didn't try to sleep, he didn't watch her either. He just stared at the flames and remembered the last time he'd shared this room with someone else's breathing. He told himself she'd be gone by morning. Now, before I continue, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about Marcus and this mysterious woman. This is about what happens when we choose compassion over self-protection. If that resonates with you, hit that like button. It tells me you're ready for where this story goes next. But morning came, and she remained. She woke before sunrise, sitting upright with the sharp alertness of someone accustomed to danger. Marcus had left bread and jerky on a plate beside her. She reached for it like a trapped animal might, quick, cautious, ready to bolt. He sat at the table drinking coffee, not watching her directly, but aware of every movement. When their eyes met, there was no pleading in hers, no gratitude, no demand. Just a wary truce between strangers who'd found themselves sharing the same small space. "You're safe here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. For now. She didn't answer, but she didn't run. And here's what I learned about human nature from watching this unfold. The snow thickened that day. Marcus tended his livestock, checking fences and breaking ice in the water troughs. He worked slowly, methodically, the way he always had. When he returned, she had swept the hearth clean and folded the blanket. He noticed her watching the cupboards, the shelves of dry goods. Hunger was a quiet thing, but it carved unmistakable lines in a person's face. He made stew that night, beans, salt pork, wild onions. She ate slowly, her movements precise, almost ceremonial. He noticed how she chewed on only one side of her mouth and suspected bruising on the other, hidden beneath her dark hair. He didn't ask who had hurt her. She didn't offer. That night, the storm worsened. Wind howled like something grieving its own voice. Marcus stoked the fire and offered her the bed. He slept in the chair, not out of kindness, he told himself, just practicality. The bed was warmer. She was healing. That was all. In the middle of the night, he woke to find her standing at the window. Her silhouette was sharp against the firelight, eyes scanning the horizon, watching for something or someone. He rose slowly. "You expecting trouble?" She turned to him then, really looked at him. There was a long silence, heavy and fragile. Then she nodded once. Marcus considered this. He had known trouble in many forms, war, hunger, loss. But this felt different. This wasn't his trouble. Yet somehow it had already made itself at home in his life. He crossed the room and pulled a blanket from the chair. "You'll stay tonight. We'll figure out the rest come morning." She looked at him with something unreadable. Not trust, not yet, but not fear either. He returned to his chair, leaned his head back, and listened to the fire crackle as wind beat against the walls. Something in him had shifted, though he couldn't name it. The silence no longer felt like mourning. If you're feeling the tension building here, you're not alone. This is the moment everything changes. But first, are you subscribed? Because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about trust and healing. When dawn bled through the shutters, pink and pale, Marcus stepped outside to feed the horses. He hadn't seen fresh tracks in weeks, but this morning his breath caught. Tire tracks, multiple vehicles, circling the cabin like a noose. He looked toward the ridge and saw them. 3 black SUVs parked along the tree line, windows tinted dark as midnight. Even from a distance, he could see the government plates. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Marcus's chest tightened, not with fear, but with cold clarity. He turned slowly back to the house. Inside, the girl stood near the fire, her eyes wide but not surprised. He said nothing. Neither did she. And in that stillness, something passed between them, a quiet understanding that neither was safe, but neither would run. Not anymore. What happened next changed both their lives forever. The morning light rose slow and muted, casting long shadows across the snow-covered valley. The air was sharp with cold and tension. Marcus Chen stood outside, one hand on the fence rail, the other holding a cup of coffee gone cold. He'd been a rancher long enough to know when the world went quiet in the wrong way. No birds called, no rabbits darted through the underbrush. Even the wind had stilled, like the land itself was holding its breath. Then came the sound, the low rumble of engines, The SUVs moved down the mountain road in formation, deliberate and unhurried. This wasn't a raid. This was a reckoning. Inside, the girl was standing at the hearth, wrapping a strip of clean cloth around her healing arm. Her hair was braided back, and there was a readiness in her posture now, not fear but preparation. "They're here," Marcus said quietly. She looked up, and her eyes, already wide, grew distant. He reached for the rifle above the door, but didn't take it down. His hand paused, then dropped. The gun wouldn't help him now. This is it, the moment of truth. If you're invested in what happens to Marcus and this brave young woman, smash that like button, because what unfolds next will restore your faith in human decency. The vehicles stopped 50 yards from the cabin, engines ticking as they cooled. Car doors slammed in sequence, a sound like gunshots in the still air. 6 agents emerged, all wearing tactical gear, all moving with practiced efficiency. At their head was a woman in her 40s, badge gleaming on her chest, expression carved from stone and bureaucratic certainty. She approached with the confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. The girl stepped outside before Marcus could speak. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Agent Rodriguez," she said. The woman stopped, surprise flickering across her features. Isabella, finally a name. Marcus remained still, arms loose at his sides, feet planted. He didn't speak. There was no point in explaining something neither side had words for. He only watched, trying to understand what this agent saw. A grizzled rancher with a cabin full of ghosts, standing next to a young woman who should have been in custody months ago. The silence stretched long enough for the wind to return, brushing along the edges of the standoff like breath, trying to revive a dying fire. Then Agent Rodriguez spoke, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "You've been harboring a fugitive, Mr. Chen." "I've been helping someone who needed help," Marcus replied. "She's an illegal immigrant who jumped bail on her asylum hearing. She's a human being who was bleeding in my snow." Isabella stepped between them. "I chose not to return to that hearing," she said quietly, but with a certainty that needed no amplification. "And I chose to stay here." "Choice isn't always an option in your situation," Rodriguez said, though something in her tone had softened slightly. "It's the only option that matters," Isabella replied. The agent studied Marcus for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, not softening but recalibrating. "You know what you're risking here? Harboring charges, federal prosecution, prison time?" "I know what I'm choosing," Marcus answered. Same as she did. Rodriguez looked away then, toward the vast expanse of wilderness that stretched beyond Marcus's property. The past lay out there somewhere, tangled with laws and policies and human suffering that couldn't be solved with badges and handcuffs. She turned back to Marcus. "I have a job to do." "So do I," he said, "taking care of people who need taking care of. What happens next will either restore your faith in humanity or break your heart. Either way, you need to see it. If this story is hitting you in the feels, let me know in the comments below." Agent Rodriguez walked closer, close enough that Marcus could see the conflict in her eyes. This wasn't just about immigration law anymore. This was about what kind of person she chose to be when nobody was watching. "She can't stay here indefinitely," Rodriguez said. "You know that." "Then, help us find a way she can stay legally," Marcus replied. The agent was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached into her jacket. Marcus tensed, but she only pulled out a business card. "There's an immigration lawyer in Billings," she said, handing it to Isabella. "Maria Santos. Tell her I sent you. Tell her it's about the asylum case that got lost in the system." Isabella took the card with trembling fingers. Rodriguez stepped back, her voice carrying new authority, not the kind that came from badges, but the kind that came from conscience. "I was never here," she said, "and you were never found." She turned and walked back to the SUVs. Within minutes they were gone, leaving only tire tracks in the snow and the echo of engines fading into the distance. Marcus and Isabella stood in the sudden quiet, snow beginning to fall again in soft, silent flakes. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I did," he replied. "We all did." She looked at him then, really looked at him. Not with gratitude or obligation, but with something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement of one soul seeing another clearly. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus glanced at the business card in her hand, then at the cabin behind them, his home, which no longer felt like a tomb. Now we figure out how to build something together, legally, properly, but together. Over the following months, they did exactly that. Isabella's asylum case was reopened with Maria Santos's help. The lost paperwork was mysteriously found. Her story, fleeing domestic violence in El Salvador, seeking safety in a country that had forgotten how to offer it easily, was finally heard by a judge who understood that justice and law weren't always the same thing. Marcus testified on her behalf, not as a savior, but as a witness to her character, her strength, her fundamental decency. The town of Cedar Falls, initially suspicious, gradually warmed to the quiet young woman who helped at the community center and spoke 3 languages fluently. They were married the following spring beneath the oak tree where Sarah was buried. Isabella had asked if it was appropriate, and Marcus had said, "Sarah would have liked you. She would have wanted this." If this story moved you, if it reminded you that compassion is always a choice we can make, I need you to do something for me. Share this video. Share it with someone who needs to remember that broken people can heal each other. Share it with someone who's forgotten that love shows up in the most unexpected places. The cabin no longer echoed with silence. Isabella's laughter filled the spaces where grief had lived. She planted new flowers around Sarah's tree, not replacing the old ones, but adding to them, creating something that honored the past while embracing the future. Marcus learned Spanish. Isabella learned to ride horses. They both learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means making room for new joy alongside old sorrow. 2 years later, as Marcus watched Isabella teach their infant daughter to say Papa in both English and Spanish, he understood something profound about the nature of grace. It doesn't arrive when we're ready for it. It doesn't come in the form we expect. It shows up bleeding in our snow, speaking languages we don't recognize, asking nothing but offering everything. The daughter they named Sarah Elena, honoring both the woman who had loved Marcus first and the heritage Isabella carried with such pride. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and when she laughed, it sounded like hope learning to sing. Here's what I want you to remember from Marcus and Isabella's story. Every day we have the choice to open our door or keep it closed. We can choose fear, or we can choose love. We can choose isolation, or we can choose connection. The world is full of people who are bleeding in the snow, metaphorically speaking. People who need someone to see them as human beings first, everything else second. People who need someone to choose compassion over convenience. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own capacity for grace, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel, because I'm going to keep telling stories that matter. Stories that remind us who we can be at our best. And more importantly, look around your own life. Who's bleeding in your snow? Who needs someone to open the door? Because the most beautiful love stories aren't the ones that start with passion, they're the ones that start with one person choosing to see another person's humanity. That's how we change the world. One door at a time, one choice at a time, one act of unexpected grace at a time. Until next time, remember, the door is always there. The only question is whether we choose to open it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Next week, I'm sharing the story of a teacher who changed an entire community with nothing but a library card and an unshakable belief in second chances. You won't want to miss it.